How much does it cost to retire? Well, there's 5 major factors I look at. Number 1 is how much income do you want in retirement? So what are your living expenses? Number 2, what are the projected taxes going to be in retirement? Meaning if you have $1 million, that's wonderful, but is it in an IRA? Because do we have to pay taxes to end up with certain levels of income? So another consideration. Legacy planning. Is there a certain amount of money that you want to be leaving to children or other heirs? And what are the tax implications of doing so? How are you invested? So number 4 is what investments are you using and how are you allocated in order to meet those living expenses? And then number 5 is what income are you planning from non-portfolio income sources? Things like Social Security, things like pension. So what we want to understand is what do we need to do to understand how much is retirement going to cost so that we don't outlive our money. As a reminder, I'm Ari Taublieb, a financial planner, and I'm here to help you retire early. So number 1, how much is it going to cost to retire? How much do you want to spend in retirement? The big question, and one of the really most undervalued questions, I would say, is how much do you want to spend in retirement? It's a very simple question. You might be watching this video going, Ari, I've already thought about that. I have a good sense of what that number is. But I want to invite you to think about the retirement smile. You might have already thought about this. You might have heard this in my podcast. But what the retirement smile is it's a way to think about retirement a little differently. Because let's assume you retire at age 65. You've got your health, you've got your energy, you're able to travel, do some of the things you've been waiting your whole life for, and now you're spending a little bit more than you expected. Not a bad thing at all. That's why we invest. That's why we go to work every day. That's why we want to live that dream life. Wonderful. Well, now let's assume 10 years later, your health isn't at the same spot or you don't have the same energy and you're spending a little less than usual. And then let's assume, call it 10 years later after that, medical expenses have gone up. Or there's certain expenses like sending kids to college or grandchildren that you want to be able to assist. Well, what that is that's the retirement smile. So you spend more right when you retire, while you have your traveling, while you have your energy, while you have your health, and then you tend to spend a little bit less. And as those years go down and you're not spending as much, it starts to come back up again. That's with things like giving. That's with all of these different things that you can think about. And so if you're saying, you know what, I want to spend off $100,000 per year, it's a good starting place, but odds are you're going to spend a little more in certain years and a little less in other years. And so can you take an average to use as a starting place? Now, once again, this is why people work with planners to understand how much can I reasonably spend. But it's one of the things to think through is you might be saying $100,000 per year. Well, is that a good calculation? Because 1, is that after taxes? 2, is that adjusted for inflation? So that's what we're thinking through there. The next thing I want to touch on is how are you invested? So how much does it cost to retire? Let's assume you have $1 million in that matter. And let's assume you want to spend $100,000 per year. Well, if you didn't invest that at all, just taking a very basic example, you have $1 million, you want to spend $100,000 per year, you'd run out of money in 10 years if you did not invest your money at all. Extremely unrealistic, but I just want to show you that if you do nothing at all, the first few years of retirement are going to feel very, very good. But then all of a sudden you'll run out of money. So what can we do to avoid that? What are the strategies that you want to look at? Try looking at number 1, how are you invested? If you're invested for maximum growth, it could be a wonderful thing because over time, history has proven that that is the best way to grow your money over time, being maximized in that growth sector. Now, not growth companies, you're owning value companies, small companies, real estate, international companies, emerging markets, but it's owning a diversified mix. So let's assume you want to grow your money very, very, really as much as possible. It's wonderful. But now what you're doing is you're subjecting yourself to that short-term risk. And the last thing I want to have happen for any of my clients is that the market takes a downturn and they feel, not only did I lose so much value, but where is income going to come from? So that's why you want to make sure you have enough in conservative investments so that no matter what's happening in the market, you don't have to worry. The framework that I use with clients is the average time for the market to recover is 2.5 years. So that's the average. However, look at COVID, 5 weeks. 40% loss in value if you were invested for maximum growth and it recovered. So it's not to say it's always going to be like that. 2.5 years is the average. So let's double it. Let's be extra conservative. Well, now we want 5 years of living expenses. Using this same example, we would want $500,000 to be in cash or bonds, conservative investments that we know are going to be there for us. The other 50%, the other $500,000, we want invested for maximum growth because we want to make sure that's growing as much as possible for us in the right accounts, in the right investments to really outpace inflation, which is really what you're up against in retirement. The next thing to look at when you're looking at how much is it going to cost in retirement is what non-portfolio income sources do you have? Do you have a pension? Do you have Social Security? Now, Social Security, a big topic nowadays. Who knows if it's going to be there? Personally, I think it will be there, but to what extent? Meaning, do I think it will go away completely? There's still too much unknown in that sort, but what we do want to know is what do we want to plan on? I personally, when running projections with clients, I don't plan on it. I say, what if we don't get any Social Security? Taking an extremely conservative view to say, okay, if there is Social Security, is that a bonus? And so more than likely it will be there. So really foregoing it altogether isn't the most wise way of looking at it, but that's why we run what if scenarios. Let's create a base case. What is it you want? Okay, you want $100,000 per year adjusted for inflation after taxes, great. Well, let's add Social Security. Imagine you and your spouse have $40,000 per year coming in from Social Security. Well, now it's not $100,000 that we're planning for. It's $60,000. Now let's assume there's a pension, and let's assume that pension brings in another $40,000. Well, now we need $20,000 per year from our investment portfolio. So you can see how that makes a difference. But here's where it gets a little confusing and really fun for us planners is we can nerd out about the taxes, which is point number 4. So number 4 is how is that pension taxed? Is there a cost of living adjustment? Because if there is, that's going to make a huge difference. Look at inflation. Right now, inflation, 7.9%. That's just astronomical. Will it always be there? Most likely, no. But if we're looking at historical average of inflation, that's 3% per year. So what we want to work through is how much can we ensure we need to grow by to outpace inflation and pay for the taxes to end up with the equivalent of $100,000 per year in today's dollars. So I know that was a little bit of a mouthful, but what we want to understand is how much taxes do we have to pay, whether it be on the pension, whether it be with Social Security, depending on your state, of course. The last thing is legacy goals. Point number 5, with legacy goals, do you want to leave a certain amount to children? Some people say, you know what, I want to make sure $500,000 is going to each child, or I want to make sure I can spend enough money on my grandchildren's college, or I want to make sure that I spend all of this money on me and my spouse. We worked hard for it. If that's you, wonderful. It's not a right or wrong. It's what do you value? Because if that's what you value, then great. How can we plan for that? Spend as much as you can. You worked hard for it. I like that. But now, can we make sure that if there's a home, or if there's a second home, or if there's any other really thing in the picture, are we leaving it in the most tax efficient manner? Or are we paying unnecessary taxes and leaving our loved ones with taxes that we do not want them to have to really not just think about, but have to deal with? Because assume this example. Let's assume that you pass away and you have $1 million. And let's assume it's all an inherited IRA. So you have it in an IRA, passes to your spouse. Let's assume your child is John. So John now inherits $1 million. Wonderful. It's all in an IRA though. And with current tax law, that must be distributed over 10 years, meaning at the end of 10 years, that $1 million, it needs to be zero without paying, so that you can avoid any additional taxes or penalty. And so what you want to think through is, what if John is now a doctor and he's making a very healthy income? Well, now what's the strategy with giving John those assets? Because if you pass and now John has $1 million and he wants to take out $100,000 each year over 10 years to really do the full $1 million, which you don't have to do, by the way. You could do it all in 1 year, or you could do 5 years, do a certain amount. It's customizable. But taking this example, here's where it's really powerful, is if he's already in a very high tax bracket, now when he's taking this $100,000 per year in that example, well, now he's paying over 30% most likely, and that's conservative, not taking state tax into consideration. Well, now he's paying 30 or 40% in taxes on that $100,000. So the money you work so hard for, that $100,000, maybe he's ending up with $60,000. So that's where the planning comes in there. Just an example to illustrate that. Those are the 5 considerations when thinking about how much is it going to cost for you to retire early. If this video was helpful, please share it with someone you think could find value from it. That is what I love doing. I want to help everyone create their ideal retirement. And please, as always, like this video, comment if there's something you want me to talk about in a particular video next, and I will see you all next time.